Mold making can be an interesting and worthwhile hobby, and with just little instruction on materials and techniques, you too can reproduce figurines and small statues of all kinds for both fun and profit. This video will show you how to find an object to cast, how to create a mold of it, how to make a reproduction, and how to sell it, all in easy steps. But before we start, as artists and artists-to-be, we need to be aware that copying others' works of art can infringe on owners' copyright protections. But feel free to reproduce anything that was made before 1923, because those items are considered to be in the public domain and can be freely copied. That's why we recommend finding your items to reproduce at flea markets, second-hand shops, and antique shops, as that is where you are most likely to find older pieces that are no longer copyright protected. So, to begin, step 1 is finding that ideal figurine to reproduce. What we look for in the ideal figure is that it shouldn't violate any copyright laws. It should be unique or interesting to look at so it will appeal to a buyer. It should also have few or shallow undercuts. The object should be shaped for a blanket mold, meaning at least one side will not be copied, and it should be simple to decorate without a lot of intricate painting required. When exploring flea markets and antique shops, we look for a figurine or small statue with all those qualities. A new mold maker should look for pieces that will be simple in form. We suggest saving the more complicated pieces after gaining more experience. We look for items that have roundness as opposed to sharp edges, so it is easier to demold. A smooth surface is important too. We want figures with shallow undercuts, as deep undercuts are difficult to demold, especially for a new mold maker. The mold making method we will use is called a blanket mold. The key to a good blanket mold, where the mold making material is poured on the object, is that one side is face down and is not covered with mold material. So we check for a flat surface. That is the side that will be fastened to the mold box and will not be reproduced. These two figures we found at this flea market seem to be the perfect specimen to begin our mold making and casting instruction for all these reasons. After locating our perfect model, the next step is to gather all the mold-making materials we will need to reproduce the figure. The materials include silicone rubber. For this project we are using Mold-Rite 25, mixing or craft sticks, as well as several plastic mixing containers. A hot glue gun with extra glue sticks are used to build the mold box. We will also need a craft knife and a gram scale to weigh out the silicone. A vibrating table is used to remove air from the mold making and casting materials. As an alternative, we could use a small electric sander. We need several pairs of rubber gloves. And finally, a sheet of corrugated cardboard or foam board to build the mold box. We begin by fashioning a mold box for the model using cardboard or foam board. The walls of the box are 2 inches higher than the highest point of the model. If the model is small enough, we might be able to use a deli container, or even a cut-open plastic bottle to use as a mold box instead. Our mold box is sized so that there is at least 1 inch of space all around the perimeter of the model. A craft knife is used to cut the cardboard and fold it into shape. We check it with the model to ensure we have sized it correctly. The hot glue gun is used to glue the seams. We make certain that all seams are well coated with hot glue to prevent liquid silicone rubber from leaking out. When the box is complete, we add hot glue to the model on its flat side, the side that will not be covered with mold rubber. Glue is placed all around its edges to prevent the silicone rubber from seeping underneath it during mold making. The model is placed glue side down in the center of the mold box and held firmly in place until the glue sets. Now it's time to mix the silicone rubber. Mold-Rite 25 consists of 2 parts with a 10:1 mix ratio by weight. Part A is the base, whereas Part B is the catalyst. That is why a gram scale is needed, as both parts need to be carefully weighed out. A clean container is placed on the gram scale and the tare button pressed. This will zero out the gram scale so that the silicone can be accurately measured. For this mold box, we estimate that it will hold about 770 grams of silicone. Such estimates come with experience. 700 grams of Part A is measured out using the gram scale. A second clean container is placed on the gram scale and the tare weight button is pressed to zero out the scale. The 70 grams of Part B, or 1/10 the amount of Part A, is poured into the container. Part B is then poured into the container holding Part A. We scrape the container to get as much of the Part B material into Part A as we can. Using a craft stick, the two parts are thoroughly mixed together. We scrape the sides and bottom of this container too. The mixed color should be homogeneous without any trace of marbling. Failure to mix completely will lead to soft spots and sticky surfaces as the rubber will not completely cure. The blended rubber takes on an even blue pastel color, signifying that it is ready to be poured into the mold box. To minimize the occurrence of air bubbles, we pour a high and narrow stream into one corner of the mold box. This allows trapped air to escape from the downward stream as it is poured. We are careful not to pour the silicone on the model. Rather, we let the rubber envelop the model from one corner, as this method forces out surface air that may be trapped on the model. Air always causes unwanted air bubbles that can deform the mold. If the amount of mixed silicone is underestimated in the first batch we mixed, we can always mix and pour more without any harm to the mold. When the mold box is filled, it is placed on the vibrating table and vibrated for about 90 seconds. If a vibrating table isn't available, substitute a small electric sander. It can be placed next to the mold box and turned, also for about 90 seconds with similarly good results. After vibrating, we set the mold aside and leave it undisturbed for at least 3 hours or until the rubber cures. It will feel smooth and firm to the touch when set. Once the silicone is cured, it is time to demold. We begin by carefully stripping away the mold box from the silicone mold. The mold is flipped upside down to expose the bottom where the model was hot glued to the mold box. The rubber is gently flexed to loosen it from the model. We trim away the excess rubber and any rubber that might have seeped under the glue line to better expose the model. We continue to flex the rubber and work the model free until we have exposed it enough to grasp it firmly to extract it from the mold. This requires some patience and a gentle touch during demolding to prevent any damage to the model. Once the model is free of the mold is inspected for any loose particles that might have been left behind. Now that the mold making has been completed, it is time to create the first casting with our new mold. In the next step, we assemble all the materials required for casting. These items include cast-right art stone, which is a casting plaster, acrylic tints to color the casting, a measuring cup, clean room temperature water, mixing sticks, a clean mixing container, a craft knife, a vibrating table or electric sander, rubber gloves. To determine the amount of water needed, we simply fill the rubber mold to the top with water. We then pour it back into a clean mixing container. Small scoops of cast-right art stone are added to the container until it begins to build up on top of the surface of the water. Once the island of plaster covers 2/3 of the water surface, we begin mixing. When properly mixed, the plaster will have the consistency of heavy cream. At this point, the liquid plaster may be tinted. We use a Caucasian tinted acrylic paint to try to match the color of the original figurine. After mixing is completed, the colored slurry is slowly poured into the mold. This method prevents splashing and the addition of air. The mold is filled to the top and placed on a vibrating table. Again, if a vibrating table is unavailable, one can use the vibrations from an electric sander to accomplish the job. Either way, the mold is vibrated for about 90 seconds. This is called de-airing. Then we set aside the mold and leave it undisturbed for 2 or more hours to cure. After curing, we demold by carefully pulling the mold away from the freshly cured casting by gently flexing the rubber mold. We are careful not to put pressure on the casting, as though it is firm to the touch, it is still very fragile at this stage, like frozen butter. We continue to work the mold until we are able to extract the casting. Because the plaster is still soft at this stage, any flashing can easily be removed with a craft knife. This makes any cleanup easier. If you wait too long, the plaster gets very hard and much more difficult to make corrections. The casting is now set aside to dry for at least 48 hours before it can be painted and the surface is sealed. After a complete drying, we can decorate the casting using acrylic paints and then seal its surface with a matte or gloss polyurethane clear coat. Now we are ready to post our new work of art on eBay or similar selling sites to reap the rewards of our efforts and to prove that mold making and castings can be both fun and profitable.